Hello everyone, it's Rune again. Today I've got some more scary Reddit stories to read to you from r/nosleep. Unfortunately, in the last episode in our Minecraft world, I died and kind of lost all my stuff, so we're basically starting from scratch. But, everything happens for a reason, so be sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you're enjoying this style of content. And with all that out of the way, let's get into the first story. Alright, our first story today comes from Reddit user willing_procedure_34, and it is titled, I processed death certificates at a city hospital. I found a pattern in room 314. Tonight, my husband is in that room. I've worked in the medical records basement at St. Agnes Hospital for 11 years. My job is boring, and I like it that way. I sit surrounded by gray filing cabinets and the low hum of servers, typing death certificates into the state database. The doctor already fills in the cause of death. I just copy it, hit submit, and move on to the next file. I don't see patients. I don't hear sirens. After 11 years, you learn to stop reading the words and just see shapes. I noticed a pattern by accident. My coffee had worn off, I was typing slow, and I saw 2 certificates from the 3rd floor. Same room number, 314. Same cause of death, cardiac arrest. The dates of the death were exactly 1 year apart. I almost let it go. Coincidences happen, but boredom makes you curious, so I started pulling more files. Over the next week, I went through every death certificate from room 314 going back to 2005. I found 37 cases, all cardiac arrest, all between midnight and 3 a.m. The attending physicians changed, the patients changed, the only constant was the room. I pulled the physical admission logs for those patients. This meant spending my lunch breaks in the old archives, breathing in mold and paper dust. What I found made me close the folder and sit in the dark for a long time. Every single one of the 37 patients had a flag note in their file. Not always criminal, sometimes just a social worker's observations or a nurse's shift report. Patient became highly agitated when wife visited. Daughter asked staff not to leave patient alone with grandchildren. Multiple bruises in various stages of healing noted on spouse during intake. The hospital never acted on these notes. They just got filed. And then the patient got admitted for something routine, a broken hip, a UTI, pneumonia, and ended up in room 314. And then they died. Quietly, cardiac, with no one asking questions. I told myself I was seeing patterns in noise, but then I looked at the nursing staff assignments for those specific nights shifts. Most nights, the floor nurses rotated normally, but there was one name that kept appearing in the margins of the old paper rosters, written in small, neat handwriting. N. Bishop. The name stopped showing up in 1982. I searched our employee records. Noreen Bishop was a night nurse at St. Agnes from 1965 to 1982. She died on December 17, 1982 in room 314. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Her HR file was thin, but I found 2 disciplinary write-ups. One for refusing to administer pain medication to a patient she referred to as a monster. The other for being found in the room of a cardiac arrest victim at 2 a.m., sitting calmly beside the bed, holding the patient's hand. She told her supervisor she was just saying goodbye. The patient was a man who had been investigated twice for severe domestic abuse, but never charged due to lack of evidence. I stopped sleeping. I started volunteering for extra night shifts in the records room so I could dig deeper. I found old, crumbling shift logs where Noreen had written tiny, cramped notes in the margins next to specific patient names. He won't hurt her anymore. The children are safe now. She asked me to. I didn't know who she was until I found a faded, handwritten complaint from a doctor in 1954, buried in a box of incident reports that should have been shredded decades ago. The doctor accused a nurse E. Acklot of deliberate inaction resulting in patient demise. The patient was a man with severe burns on his hands. His wife had matching burns on her back. The doctor wrote, Nurse Alcott stated she heard the patient's wife crying from across the ward, and that she prayed on it, and that God told her to let the man suffer. Nurse Alcott was let go quietly. She died 2 years later. Cause of death, cardiac arrest, room 314. Something was being passed down. A duty, a curse, I didn't know what to call it. 3 nights ago, my husband was admitted to St. Agnes. He fell off a ladder in our garage. Broken collarbone, possible concussion. They kept him on the 3rd floor for observation. When I walked into his room to sit with him, I saw the room number on the door. 314. I froze. I should have asked for a transfer. I should have made a scene, but I didn't. I just walked in, sat beside his bed, and held his hand. I smiled when the nurses came in. I told them he was a good man, a hard worker, just clumsy. But last night, one of the night nurses paused in the doorway. She was older, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. She glanced at the room number. She glanced at my husband, sleeping heavily under the thin hospital blanket. Then she looked back at me, and she said very softly, "You know, don't you?" I didn't answer. I just stared at her. She gave a small, sad smile, turned and walked away. Her footsteps faded down the hall. I'm writing this from the vinyl chair beside his bed. It's 1:47 a.m. The hospital is quiet. My husband is asleep. The nurse hasn't come back. But I can feel something in this room. A warmth, a presence. It's standing just behind me, at the very edge of my vision. I don't want to turn around. I don't want to see her face. But I can smell lavender and old paper, and I can hear a voice. Thin, gentle, like a radio tuned between stations, whispering the same words over and over. She asked me to. I know what he is. I've always known. The way he apologizes after he breaks something, then makes me clean it up while smiling. The sick days I took when I couldn't show my face to coworkers. The way Sunday was always family day, and family day always ended with me crying in the bathroom, scrubbing my skin raw in the shower. I never told anyone. I just typed certificates and came home and pretended. For 11 years. I haven't decided what I'll do, but my hand is resting on his IV line, and the room feels very, very patient. The comments seem to be in all agreement that she should just let the girl take care of him. But I like this one comment I'll read to you. It says, "That's all well and good, but how do I get this job? Just filing death certificates all day? I would kill, no pun intended, for a job like this where I don't have to interact with anybody." And someone replied to this and said, "For real though, the dream is avoiding people until the spooky stuff starts." Hey, I just want to mention that 94.1% of the people who watch my videos consistently are not subscribed. So if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to hit that subscribe button to help me out. Okay, our next story today comes from Reddit user Static Voices YT, and it is titled, "My new neighbor is incredibly nice. Everyone in town hates him." I don't really know why I'm writing this now after everything. It's late again. One of those nights I can't sleep, and I figured if I got it out of my head and onto a screen, maybe it would stop hurting. So bear with me. This is going to be a long one, because I need to get it all out of my head, every piece of it, in order, or I don't think I'll ever stop turning it over in my head. We moved into this house back in spring. My wife passed a little over a year ago, and after that I couldn't keep up with the mortgage on one income, not with 2 kids. So we downsized. Smaller house, smaller yard, new town. New school mid-year for both kids, which is its own kind of cruelty when you're a certain age. My daughter is 14. She hated every part of it. Her friends were an hour away now, and she made sure I knew it every single day. Doors closed a little too hard, answers a little too short. My son is 5. He didn't really understand what had happened to his mom, and he definitely didn't understand why we were leaving. He just wanted me to be okay. He'd tell me that, out of nowhere, standing in the kitchen with a bowl of cereal in his hands. "I want you to be happy, Dad." 5 years old, saying that to his father. The day the moving truck pulled up, I was hauling a box of my wife's old kitchen things up the driveway when a man came across the lawn from next door. Brian. Late 50s, maybe older, hard to tell. He told us right off the bat that he'd lost his wife a few years back, before either of us had said much of anything at all, like he wanted the fact on the table before we could form any other opinion of him. He was a little awkward, stood too close when we talked, laughed too long at his own jokes, and sometimes at things that weren't jokes. But he seemed harmless, sweet, in a lonely old man kind of way. He talked about how exciting it must be, starting somewhere new, and I glanced over at my daughter without meaning to, because she was standing there with her arms crossed, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "Not everyone's excited," I said. He followed my eyes to her and something shifted in his face. Before he smiled it away. "She'll come around," he said. "New places just take time." She was watching him the whole time he said it, and she didn't say a word, but I remember the look on her face. That first night, after the truck pulled away and the house was just boxes stacked to the ceiling in every room, I heard her on the phone upstairs with one of her old friends. I stood outside her door for a second, deciding whether to knock, and decided against it. She needed space to grieve the move in her own way, I figured, same as she was still grieving her mother in her own way. I think about that decision more than almost any other one I made. Not because it was wrong exactly, just because it was the first of so many times I chose to leave her alone with something instead of asking what it was. Over that first week, Brian was at our door constantly. A casserole one night, a bag of tomatoes from his garden the next. Little things, the kind of stuff you'd expect from a retiree with nothing but time and no one to spend it on. My daughter wanted no part of any of it. She'd disappear upstairs the second she heard his voice at the door. Teenage moodiness, I figured, same as everything else. It was around the second week that the gifts started shifting toward my son almost entirely. A remote control car, still in the box. A set of dinosaur figures that must have run him $30 or $40. Old men get generous when they're lonely, is what I chalked it up to. Brian started timing himself around us. Not obviously, but if I look back at it now, he was always outside exactly when my son was, watering a lawn that didn't need it whenever he was in the front yard. Finding a reason to be at his own mailbox at the exact moment the school bus dropped my kids off, always with some comment aimed at my son first before anyone else got a word in. There was a moment, maybe the 10th or 11th day, when he said something I brushed off completely and now can't stop replaying. My son had scraped his knee on the driveway, and Brian was out front and came jogging over faster than a man his age should have been able to. He crouched down, looked at the knee, and said, "Oh, that's nothing. You should see what I patched up on the last one." Then he caught himself, laughed it off, said something about being a Boy Scout leader once upon a time. I remember thinking it was an odd thing to say and letting it go in about 4 seconds. I had a business to run and a house to unpack. I didn't have room in my head for every odd thing a lonely old man said. Around that same stretch, I had a work emergency come up on short notice. A client meeting I couldn't push, and no sitter lined up because we didn't know anyone else in the town yet well enough to ask. Brian happened to be out front when I was scrambling to figure out what to do. He offered to just keep an eye on my son for the hour I'd be gone. Said he had toys and cartoons and it'd be no trouble at all. I remember actually considering it, standing there with my keys in my hand, running late, thinking it might be a genuine solution to the problem. My daughter was the one who had put a stop to it. She came down the stairs, must have heard the tail end of the conversation through her window, and told me she'd watch her brother herself, that I didn't need to leave him with the neighbor. I told her I appreciated it, but she had her own things to do that afternoon. She said it didn't matter, she'd rather stay home. I didn't push back. Some part of me was relieved to not have to make the decision myself. I never once asked her why it mattered so much to her. About 2.5 weeks in, I was getting the mail when Paul, the neighbor from across the street, caught me at the curb. Paul's the kind of guy who mows on Saturdays and waves but doesn't stay. So when he stayed, I knew it was something. He didn't dance around it the way I expected. He looked almost sick saying it, like the words had been sitting in him a while and he'd finally decided somebody needed to hear them. He told me flat out that Brian made his skin crawl, had for years, and that he wasn't the only one on the street who felt that way. He said Brian and his wife had fostered a handful of kids at one point. Different boys mostly, a few months here, a school year there, and every single one of them eventually had been moved along to another family, quicker than Paul ever thought made sense. He mentioned one boy in particular, Marcus, who stayed the longest of any of them, almost a full year, who'd apparently run off from the house twice before the county finally pulled him and placed him somewhere else for good. Paul said nobody ever got a straight answer out of the boy about why he kept running, just that he'd go quiet whenever anyone tried to ask. He said none of the kids ever said much about it while they were still around. Kids that age rarely do, but a couple of the neighbors back then swore the boys always seemed to go quiet and small whenever Brian was in the room. I know how it sounds, Paul said, but I wouldn't let that man within 10 feet of my own kids, and I haven't in 15 years. Something's wrong with him. Everyone on the street knows it. Nobody's ever been able to prove anything, so nobody talks about it out loud. But I'm telling you, keep your son away from him. I mean it. I told my kids that night to keep their distance from him. My daughter didn't even look up from her phone, but I caught her nodding, like I was only just now agreeing with something she'd already decided weeks earlier. My son asked why. I told him Brian was probably fine, but I just wanted him closer to home for a while. He nodded the way he does when he's not really listening. Later that same night, at dinner, my son said something that stopped me mid-bite. Good things come to those who wait. I laughed because it sounded so strange coming out of a 5-year-old. This little saying that had belonged to somebody's grandfather, not a kindergartner still working on his table manners. I asked him where he'd heard it. Brian says it, he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I told him to not talk to Brian anymore. My daughter, across the table, put her fork down hard enough that it made a sound against her plate. I told you he was weird, she said, not even looking up. I told her I knew. I was handling it, and she gave me a look like she didn't believe that for a second. I didn't think much of the look at the time. A few days later, I was doing dishes and looked out the window over the sink and saw my son standing near the black fence, talking, not to himself, talking, and then pausing, like there was somebody on the other side answering him. I dried my hands and went out and asked who he was talking to. Brian, he said, easy as anything, like I'd ask what the color of the sky was. I looked towards Brian's house and caught the end of his sliding glass door closing, slow, unhurried, like he had been standing there and had simply decided the conversation was over rather than been caught in the middle of it. That was the only time it ever happened, because I made sure of it. I walked straight over to his house and knocked hard enough that it probably rattled something inside. And when he opened the door, I didn't hold back. I told him to stay away from my kids, and especially my son. I told him if I ever caught him near that fence again, I didn't care what was true and what wasn't. I'd make sure every person on the street heard exactly what Paul had told me and then some. He didn't argue. He just stood there and took it, shoulders dropping, apologizing in this quiet, defeated way, saying he'd gotten carried away, that he was lonely, that he hadn't meant any harm by it. I remember almost feeling sorry for him. There was this block party toward the end of that first month. Folding tables in someone's driveway, a grill going, kids running between yards with no real boundary to any of it. Brian showed up, and I watched something happen that I didn't fully register at the time for how obvious it was. Conversations trailed off the second he joined them. A woman gathered her 2 kids under the excuse of getting them a plate of food the moment he crouched near their end of the yard. A man I'd met exactly once angled his whole body between Brian and his daughter without seeming to think about it. like it was a reflex. Nobody said anything to his face. Nobody had to. At some point, I lost track of my own daughter for a few minutes, and when I found her again, she was standing near the fence line at the edge of our yard, close enough to Brian that I could tell they were mid-conversations. Her arms crossed, her voice low, but sharp in a way I recognized even from a distance. By the time I got over there, she was already walking away from him, and Brian was doing the same defeated shoulder drop I'd seen on his doorstep. I asked her what that was about. She said she told him to stop hovering around her brother, that it wasn't normal, that she didn't care how lonely he was. I told her that was probably enough, that I'd already handled it, and she said, quiet, like she didn't fully expect me to hear her, "I don't think you have." I let it go. After that, things went quiet, genuinely quiet. No more gifts, no more crouching at the fence, no more watering a lawn that didn't need it whenever my son was outside. I felt bad, honestly, about how hard I'd come on him. That's a diabolical line right there. Maybe he really was just a sad old man who'd forgotten how to act around children because he didn't get the chance anymore. My son changed a little too, in ways I noticed but couldn't place at the time. He'd go quiet sometimes for no reason, staring off in the middle of a game like his mind had wandered somewhere I wasn't invited. I asked him once what he was thinking about, and he just shrugged and said nothing. The same shrug his sister gave me about everything. Just a phase, I figured. Kids that age get moody too. They just don't have the words for it yet. Do 5-year-olds really get moody like that? I don't really know. My daughter grew quieter during that stretch too. But it was a different kind of quiet than her usual moodiness. 14-year-old girls definitely do get moody. That's something I do know. Watchful almost. A few times I caught her looking out the kitchen window towards Brian's house for longer than made sense. Like she was keeping tabs on something the rest of us had stopped paying attention to. I asked her once if everything was okay, and she said, fine. Went back upstairs. Still adjusting to the move, probably. There was always some explanation close at hand that summer. Some reason it was easier not to sit with how little I actually understood about what was happening under my own roof. Looking back now, I can see all of it laid out like a trail. At the time, it was just noise. Small, forgettable noise. She didn't come home from school on time one Thursday. I didn't panic right away. I thought maybe she was with some new friends, finally starting to feel like she belonged somewhere. By 4 o'clock, I started calling her phone and getting nothing. By 5:30, I was calling the parents of the 2 girls she'd mentioned in passing over the last few weeks. Girls I'd never met, and neither of them had seen her since the final bell. By 6 o'clock, I called the school. By 6:30, I called the police. Feels like he didn't wait a long time before doing that. I'm not gonna walk through every hour of that night here. If you've ever had to make that call, you know what it does to you, and if you haven't, I hope to God you never do. The officer who first took my call asked all the right questions, calm and practiced in a way that somehow made it worse, because it meant this was a situation he'd seen before, and my daughter had just become a case number. He told me they'd start with her known route, her friends, her phone records, and that a unit would canvass the area that night. He told me, gently but plainly, that the most useful thing I could do was stay by the phone in case she turned up on her own or someone called with information. I couldn't do that. I now know it might have been the wrong choice, or at least not the one they wanted from me, but I couldn't sit in that kitchen doing nothing while it was still light enough outside to see anything at all. So once the officers had what they needed from me, I got in my car and started driving her route home from school myself. Slow. That route cuts down our street on its way in, past our house, past his. His car wasn't in the driveway. The house looked wrong in the dark. No lights. One of the front curtains gone entirely, just bare glass where it used to hang. The front door sat open a few inches, like it had been pulled shut in a hurry and hadn't quite caught. I called it in right there from the driveway, standing on his lawn with my phone against my ear. telling the dispatcher what I was looking at and where I was. She told me to wait for a unit. I didn't wait. Some part of me already knew, I think, standing there on his porch, and some part of me needed to see it before anyone else could tell me what it meant. The house was mostly empty. Furniture gone from some rooms, still sitting untouched in others, like he'd only taken what mattered to him and abandoned the rest without a second thought. There was one door at the end of the hallway that was closed, and the second I opened it, I understood this room was different from the rest of the house. Clean, cared for, maintained, in a house that had otherwise been stripped and left to rot. The walls were covered, every inch of them, in photographs of my daughter. Not recent ones, not just from the last few days. All of them, going back to the very first days we'd moved in. Her walking to the bus stop, her sitting in the backyard reading, her framed through what had to be our kitchen window, at the table, not looking at whoever was holding the camera because she never knew anyone was there to hold it. On the desk beneath the photographs, there was a single sheet of paper, a folded one, with my name written on it on the front in the same tidy handwriting. I want to put down here exactly what it said, because I think about it more than I think about almost anything else right now. It read, "I hope you understand I never meant your son any harm. Boys just remind me of a version of myself I never got to keep. I'm sorry if I made you worry. You're a good father, better than most I've watched over the years. I can see how hard you're trying to carry 2 kids on your own. I've taken care of a few boys like that before. They needed me more than anyone else gave me credit for. People always find reasons to be afraid of a man who only wants to help. I knew which one of you needed me most since the day I pulled the truck into your driveway, before I'd even shaken your hand. Some things a man just knows the moment he sees them. A father only has so much of himself to give. Yours went to your son. I watched her, long enough, close enough. She never once looked happy standing in a room with you, and you never noticed, and I did. You don't need to worry about her anymore. I'll take care of that part now, the way you clearly never had the time to. She'll understand soon enough why I waited as long as I did. Think of it as one less thing." I understood everything at once, standing in that room. Every gift for my son had been real in his own mind. He believed every word of what he'd written. He believed those boys had needed him. He believed he was doing something kind. I don't know what happened to them. Not really. Not the way I'd need to know it to say it out loud. But I know enough now to understand that whatever those boys felt when they went quiet and small in his house was never gratitude, no matter what he'd convinced himself of. My daughter's fear of him was real from the start. I dismissed it for months as moodiness, as a bad mood about a bad move. She was the only one of us who ever saw him clearly, and I had months of chances to ask her what she saw, and I never once took them. I'm not writing this because I think someone is going to solve anything at this point. The police have had that note in every photograph for a while now, and there are more people far capable than me working on this case than I ever could be. I'm writing it because there's still nothing else for me to do most nights. My house is quiet and my son is asleep down the hall, and I am sitting up in the dark again, thinking about how a man can convince himself completely that taking something from you is the same as helping you. Paul warned me plainly, and I still let my guard down. My daughter warned me too, in her own way, more than once, and I heard the words without ever once hearing what she had meant by them. Harmless and a little awkward are not the same thing. I know that now. I would give almost anything to have known it then. Alright, I don't really have time for a full another story, but I want to just read some stories from 2-Sentence Horror Stories, the subreddit. And I'll probably laugh at some of them because I find them humorous, but to be clear, I'm not making fun of them. I just find this concept to be humorous. This first one comes from user firelock_NY. My lawyers were very experienced. They represented hundreds of defendants before this court. They assured me that for most of their clients, they've been able to get the sentence reduced to death. I don't know. I don't get this. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't really get what they mean reduced to death. I feel like that's the max one. I guess this next one comes from user logical roll 1382. Experiencing a hot flush, the woman asked the nurse for a glass of water, claiming spontaneous combustion ran in her family. Too late, the nurse replied, staring at the empty ultrasound screen. That one's dark. I don't really get that one either. I don't really get most of these a lot of the time. I guess, oh, her baby spontaneously combusted. That's sad. I do like this one. This one was good. This next one comes from Reddit user Cheryl_can't_think. I don't understand. I ate healthy, never smoked, never touched alcohol, and was just going out for a jog. Yet, now I lie on the sidewalk face down, dying of a heart attack at only 32. I mean, I guess. Yeah, that's pretty terrible. I wouldn't want that to happen to me. Next one comes from user original_flight 9435. I decided to take a quick nap on the couch at 4 p.m., asking my sister to wake me up in 30. I did wake up in time since the hospital clock said 4:30, but there was this old lady sobbing next to my bed. Just throwing a curveball at the end, I guess. Alright, last one, and it comes from user Level QX. I approached the young girl who seemed to be looking over the edge of a well, and she told me, "Did you know that this well is 163 meters deep?" I asked her how she knew that as I looked over the edge myself, and she replied, "Because nobody has recovered me from the bottom yet." Corny. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this little change of pace at the end. Thank you. Thank you very much for watching to the end of the video. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it. And have a wonderful day.